Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Don't Fuck This Up. Today's guest worked with some of the largest names in editorial and fashion. Starting out on the brand side and now at the helm of her own consultancy, it's brand and marketing strategist Anjali Lewis. Anjali, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And it felt like a little bit of an utterly epic arrival because we talked about this at the end of the year, but you've been up to some fun things since then. You were in Thailand for the holidays. Is that right?
I was. My family and I went to Bangkok for 12 days. And it's funny because people will say, oh, where did you go in Thailand? And I was like, actually, we just went to Bangkok.
Yeah.
And which is not necessarily the first place you think about when you think about a vacation to Thailand. But it was so fun because we decided to stay in 3 different hotels in 3 different locations.
Ooh.
Or areas, neighborhoods.
Yeah.
In order to really spend time in those neighborhoods and discover things that you wouldn't normally if you were just in this, small little circle. So we had a blast.
I love that. I mean, I've actually never been to Thailand at all, but Bangkok always stands out as it's such a vibrant scene with food, and it just seems like it's a really amazing art community. Did you kind of eat your way through the neighborhoods? Like, did you find some incredible cuisine? Did you have any favorites?
We did all of those things. So I was born in Bangkok, but left when I was very, very young, and didn't go back for a very long time. So I feel like my child eyes remember Bangkok in one way, and now as an adult, really experiencing it differently. But food has always been, the number one. So yes, we did eat our way through both, street food as well as terrific restaurants, and got a ton of massages, which sounds weird and random, but really necessary, especially when you're walking 10 miles a day around the city. And it's very inexpensive. And I think my biggest tip there is that though things are incredibly inexpensive, tip people well because the work is still the same. So we did a lot of over tipping, which I have I never have a problem doing.
Yeah, same. I'm always like, if anything, I'm going to tip too much, but I'm never going to be wondering if I tipped enough. Like I would rather just have people feel taken care of, especially like if I'm ever out to brunch. I know I had friends who worked in hospitality for years as servers during brunch, and that was the dreaded shift. And so I still to this day just have a level of empathy for people who are working brunch that is, far and above maybe any other meal that I'm like, is 30%, 40%? How well can we can make this worth your while? Cause I'm also at brunch and I'm not drinking. So I'm like the double worst customer.
During the recession of 2008, my husband and I decided that we would have an approach, and it would be to eat less and tip more. So, everybody was spending less money, and we didn't want to shortchange those out there that are working super hard in the service industry. So we tried the eat less, tip more, which worked pretty well for a little while because there's, no one needs to eat the amount of food that we are served all the time.
Yes.
But we should leave as much as we can. So that worked really well until we just ended up expanding the budget and just eating more, tipping more. And it's been a downhill since then.
That's amazing. So are you what's your favorite cuisine if you're because you live in New York City most of the time. I know you also split your time upstate, but New York, I do think LA is a great food city. Since moving here, I'm like, damn, we have some really good food here. But New York is hard to beat. It's 3 a.m. You're like, I want Ethiopian. It's there in 20 minutes, And so I do think New York has something special above most cities from a cuisine standpoint. What's your go-to? It's Friday night. You're like, we are definitely not cooking. What's your go-to dining out? What's your go-to ordering in?
Oh gosh. Well, this all depends on whether I'm alone or my husband's with me. So if I'm
Okay.
alone, there's a lot of guilty pleasures that go on. So if I'm dining in by myself, it could be fried chicken.
Mm. Oh my God. Yes.
Or it could be, a Cuban restaurant that's nearby our apartment that I love. If I'm going out, I mean, it's interesting in the neighborhood that we live in Brooklyn. It feels like such a food desert, and there's so many restaurants, but they're not really great. But
Yeah.
most of them are Italian. So it is a carb fest. So lots of pasta. If my husband's there, we do a little negotiation, and we often will order in either bear burger or sushi.
I
He's
love
a lot
that.
healthier than I am.
Yeah. I was like, I'm usually like the one that my husband's like, could we have burgers and fries and a milkshake for you? And I'm like, yes. Also, I can't eat like a frat boy all the time, so it's got to find like the balance. But he's better now. But like when we first got together, I remember being like, okay, I cannot eat like you, or I will not look like me.
It's a really hard one for sure. And we are really lucky to be in New York. And even though, the food desert of my neighborhood is very real, everything is super close. So,
Yeah.
we're not afraid to hop on a train because we've got a major craving
Yeah.
as New Yorkers, I think, at least me as a New Yorker. So it's all out there. And what my favorite thing about New York is, and they're disappearing so quickly, is the all night diner. There's
Mm,
nothing better
nothing
than
better.
super late night breakfast.
Yes, and I actually love like making breakfast for dinner at home too. I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
like, what if we had French toast and eggs? Carb
Let's
fest.
do
Yeah. Let's do it. But yeah, the diner, you're right. And we definitely don't have diners in LA. Like that is a
We do not.
novelty that we don't have. So yeah, for sure. We're coming to New York soon and I'm like, I'm ready for some
Ooh,
diner food. I need some good bagels. I need my fill. But also you all don't
absolutely.
have good Mexican food in New York. That is not a
This is
thing.
true. We do
It's
not.
true.
We do not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned we spend half of our time upstate, and up here we're in the woods. So if you have a craving, it's a real plan to go find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But during the pandemic, I made it a point to learn how to make the foods that we were craving, or at least I was craving. So,
Yes.
so it's like if you're craving Chinese takeout, you better learn how to make Chinese takeout, pizza,
Yes.
pasta, Greek food, Mexican food. And we started to make a game of it by making meals almost mini vacations. It's like, where do you want to go? Let's go to Paris. Great. We're going to dive deep into making really good French food. So that was super fun.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, one look at your Instagram and there is definitely a lot of really beautiful dishes that I think you've cooked on there. Like I don't think you're snapping that at a restaurant. I'm like, wait a minute. How do I go to a restaurant, Anjali? I want to go there.
I do like a plating moment as well. So it's not
Yes.
just the cooking, but it's also the presentation of it, and it's just so much fun, and it's very meditative in its process.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, you mentioned growing up, that you moved when you were really young and, left behind Thailand, but was there a lot of cooking in your household? Like what
Oh
inspired
yeah.
kind of that passion for food, for plating, for all of it? Because that's not something that you just necessarily wake up and decide to do one day.
Well, it's probably in two parts or several parts. So yes, cooking and food. Has always been in like very important in my family. My
Yeah.
grandmother was an amazing cook. Actually, both my grandmothers. My mother, an amazing cook. We, of course, when I was born and lived in Thailand until I was 7, it was all Thai food, and rice was key. And I think that's actually where I found created my love for fried chicken, because my grandmother made the best fried chicken ever. And there is nothing better than Thai fried chicken. So if you haven't had
Yes.
it, go seek it out. And my parents actually became vegetarian actually, and part of the time vegan when I was very little. So my mother, being a really good cook, actually made some mind-blowing vegetarian vegan dishes, which,
Mm.
yeah, super lucky to have her in our life. And then, as we grew up, like my grandmother here was an amazing cook. And so it was always around us and very multiculturally around us. I never really wanted to learn how to cook, or I watched my mom, and yes, I was a part of it and I could cook, but it didn't become something that I felt very strongly about or found passion in. You're going to laugh, until the Cooking Network, or the Food Network.
Really? Yeah, the Food Network.
The Food
Totally.
Network. So early days of the Food Network, where there were like 4 shows on rotation. It was ridiculous. But it was, this channel purely dedicated to these interesting humans that wasn't Julia Child, cooking food, and oftentimes not necessarily the things that, were always readily available. So that actually got me really thinking about cooking, not just as sustenance, but really as experimentation,
Yeah.
and learning. And I very, very much enjoy it because there are like ingredients and formulas and master recipes that actually become
Yeah.
multiple recipes. And then the plating of it, I mean, it just goes back to you eat with your eyes. So how do
Yes.
you present something in a way that allow yourself or the person eating with you to get excited even before they taste the food? And of course, you want to make sure that it tastes wonderful too.
Right.
But
We've all seen the pretty thing that doesn't taste so good. I'm thinking of cakes specifically. That's baking, but still, you're like, oh, that looks great. And then you're like, oh, it's foam.
it's so true. I know. And I am so not a baker. I mean, I wish I was, and I do try. But baking is a really great example. That scone looks amazing, but it's sawdust.
Yeah. And it's so disappointing. It's so
I have
disappointing.
made my share of hockey puck cinnamon buns.
It's hard. I mean, getting the balance right. I lied my way into a pastry chef job early in my, kind of pre-career days. I was like, yeah, my dad was a chef, and I, always grew up around, food. And also just like, I really appreciate that he told me, like, you can try anything once, and if you don't like it, spit it in your napkin discreetly and move on. And I think that's like a good attitude to have about other things too, but certainly trying new foods, tasting new things. But I was really bad at pastry. I don't know how they hired me. I like literally had to make a tart as an example. And I was like watching what they were doing and like totally bullshitting my way along. And I don't know how I got hired. They must have been really desperate, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I definitely fucked some things up with
Oh my
that.
gosh.
So yeah.
Well, and like everything's by feel, and it's so precise. And I'm not good at following recipes. I'm not good at following rules.
Mm,
So for me, it's like watching something on television, somebody making this amazing whatever. And I get the gist of it. Like, okay, I got
yeah.
it. And then you go off and you kind of do it yourself, and you tweak here and you add a little bit more there, a little less there. And that's the way I really like to cook, but that does not work when it comes to the world of baking.
No, I've tried it. It's bad. It's really bad. I'm better at baking now than I was back then, for sure. But like, still try to swap things out. Or I'm like, how many eggs do I really need? I don't have enough, but I bet I could make it work. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. You will have, chalky, nasty flour, too much. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
science.
So, I mean, with such a passion for food, I mean, how did you end up in fashion? Because that was really the entrance of your career. You were passionate. Did you consider going to culinary? Was that something that you went down that path and changed your mind, or was it just a hobby that you wanted to keep as much?
I mean, I think that, passion in food, you get to have a passion and you get to do it when you want to do it. And
Yeah.
work is survival, and so I didn't
Mm,
have the luxury or the opportunity to have these decisions in front of me. It's like, what would you like to do? I need to
yeah.
get a job. So
Yeah.
the job in fashion was I felt so lucky to be able to find, that first job and be a part of something that, one, was super exciting. Two, I really, really liked the people, and three, they paid me,
Yeah.
which I don't
We
know.
love that.
I
Yeah.
can't confirm if I would have gotten paid cooking. Um, so my career, the career that I have and the career that I've built, was built out of necessity and built out of need,
Yeah.
and survival. And the food part of it is the fun. And I have so many friends ask me, like, oh, when are you going to write a cookbook, or when are you going to, turn this into your livelihood? One, I don't know how to write a cookbook, and I don't know if I ever will. Like, it's a great idea. And there are moments that I was like, oh, I'll put a few recipes together for, Christmas gift. It's not going to happen. But then um, I don't know if I would enjoy it as much if it
Yeah.
became a job.
Yeah.
Because
Totally.
if we think about cooking as a career, and my brother is a chef, and he loves it, but he loves it because he's able to take his amazing set of skills and turn it into a paycheck.
Hmm.
But it's very repetitious.
Yeah. Not to
You
mention the
know,
hours, the environment. I mean, it's pretty grueling. The just
yeah,
like the intensity and the heat in the kitchen. I mean, I remember my dad in, the summertime would just come home and he's like just drenched in sweat. And then you get the stink of the food of whatever you're cooking and smell like oil or
absolutely.
anything. And he's like, this is not glamorous at all,
I know. And like,
Yeah.
my brother's lower back and knees and like all of, the wear and tear on your body, it's a lot. And, not to mention, a restaurant chef, like your job is to make that one dish exactly the same every time.
Exactly.
That's your
There's no
job.
iteration. Like
There's no,
and
no,
there's no vibes of like, ooh, maybe I'll change it up a little bit today. It's like if you do that, somebody could have an allergic reaction or just a bad time.
exactly. Whereas sitting around my dining table and, I don't know, that dish you came over for last week was perfectly spiced. And the next time that was real spicy. And I was like, yeah, I tried different pepper.
I like it. Spice roulette. That's perfect. I mean, and I think it's so interesting too, because I really appreciate, there was definitely this movement of like side hustle culture and like the girl boss movement. Everyone was like, everything has to be monetized. And, I think that there's something to be said about something that you just truly take pleasure in, that you're not trying to monetize. It doesn't have to be your career. It's not your paycheck. It's not your livelihood. Taking the pressure off of that. It's like why so many musicians, their first album is incredible. And the follow up, the sophomore album, is the hardest one because it's like everyone has an expectation of you when you start to do something and you make money from it or you gain success from it or recognition. So I like
Yeah.
that you're just enjoying this because it's something that's a pleasure. And it's also a good, counterbalance to the intensity, shall we say, of the fashion industry, of, that, community. It seems very glamorous from the outside, perhaps like being a chef. But then when you get into the inside, it's a lot of fucking work. It's not a joke. Yeah. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
early days, was that first role, was that at Donna Karan, DKNY?
Yeah, that first role was Donna Karan, or Donna Karan International, so Donna Karan and DKNY. I was the assistant to the president of Donna Karan Collection Men's, and it was fantastic. Because I mean, I'd done administrative work before, so I knew that I could do it. At least do the
Yeah.
job, the task that was put in front of me. But I got to learn so much about this industry that what we as civilians know about it is what lands on a selling floor. And it was great because, she's super smart and kind of a ball buster, but amazing characters at Donna Karan at the time. And
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to still to remain friends with so many of them. Like it's almost
Yeah.
as if you can't throw a rock without hitting someone,
Right.
that worked at Donna Karan in the 90s. So amazing, amazing boot camp. I loved it. And I was lucky enough there to have, mentors and bosses in my life there who saw something in me that I often didn't see in myself,
Mm,
and pushed me along,
yeah.
so that I could realize a career. And
Yeah.
that is where I began to focus on, the marketing and communications area of fashion.
And what do you think specifically, like when you think about those mentors, and who's maybe made the most influence in your life? Is there a moment that stands out to you that you're like, someone, someone said, hey, like you have this thing, or hey, this is your moment? Or was it just kind of the general theme of being trusted? I know that goes a really long way, especially early in your career.
I think both, but there was one conversation, and it was with Trey Laird, who is a creative director,
Yeah.
and he was my boss. He was my second boss at Donna Karan, and I'd worked for him for a couple of years. And, he sat me down and he said, what do you want to do? And he ran the creative services department and of Donna Karan. It was in-house. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he goes, this is creative services. Like, there's production, there is, the art department, there's marketing, what do you like? And I said, I think I really like the marketing part. I like marketing. He's like, great, let's figure this out, and really kind of put me on that path. And that I realized is really, really special. And it doesn't happen all the time, and people don't stop and ask the question or see someone and say, hey, you've been doing what you're doing for a little bit now. And, we can have a conversation about what you ultimately want and whether you're ready at that time of conversation to move
Yeah.
forward, or not. There was a wonderful and collaborative conversation of how to get there. And that I will always be very, very thankful for that.
I mean, that's incredible too, that someone saw in you that you were capable of more than what you were doing in that moment, right? And I think that sometimes we don't see that because it's hard to hold the mirror up sometimes when we're working so hard. I mean, you said that, this job at first was a paycheck. I mean, you were like, they're going to pay me. Great. Okay, perfect. Check, check, check. Let's do it. And I think that even coming from, I call it like scarcity mindset of like, okay, well, I don't really have any choice but to do well at this. And that was how I entered my career because I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have the option of like going home. I didn't have that kind of backup. And so it becomes sort of like you're grinding and you are grinding maybe for you, but other people see that and they're like, wow, such investment in the company, such a high performer. We need to make sure that we keep her,
Yeah.
that could be a great thing too. It is a good motivator.
It's so true. And that was probably my don't fuck this up moment, of, okay,
Yeah.
that like people see something in me and people, respect, support, and want to support me. And I don't want to let anybody down, and I don't
Yeah.
want to let myself down. And I'm not going to fuck this up, So I worked my ass off.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And I think that like when you're working that hard and people recognize you, it feels so good. It's like, wait, I'm being seen. I'm being recognized for what I'm doing. Like what you're putting in is what you're getting out. And you start to see that exchange of your own energy and your own, kind of motivation. So you moved up in the marketing and communication side. I mean, you were at Donna Karan for what, almost 11 years?
Yeah.
So over a decade, you grew significantly in your role. Did you have the opportunity to turn that around and to mentor other people? Like, did that moment come back up for you? Were you able to reciprocate that into more junior talent that you worked with?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing about, and I wish that I could say that this happens in so many places, but I don't know. But I do know that where I was at Donna Karan and subsequently in the other companies that I've been in, both junior as well as senior members of the team we've all stayed in touch and we've all like continued to mentor each other and be there for each other. And I think that to me, like aside from all of the things we got to do, and we got to do some of the wildest, things, it's the people. It's the people
Yeah.
that are so fantastic. Those that support you, those that you support, those that are older and are natural mentors, those that are younger and you are happy to be a mentee, as well, because
Yes.
you're getting from them too. I think that is brilliant. And The long answer is yes. Yes.
Yeah. I love that. And I think also like, thinking about like when we were chatting about like what we wanted to even dive into today, that word mentorship came up. And I think it thematically tends to come up on this show, how we get mentored, how we approach mentorship, and how we seek out mentors. And I don't think that has to be when you're so junior in your career. It can be at all of these moments that like we're pivoting or we're changing or we're maybe having some self-doubt, like the mentorship or like personal board of directors, that we seek out in our life. Like who are those people? Who's your hype crew? And I think knowing like mentorship can kind of take on many shapes in that way, but finding people who inspire you, who can bolster you, that's the real stuff. And I think that's what it comes from. But I do really despise when people think mentorship is only a one-way street, or it's only when you're really junior that you need mentors. Like I couldn't disagree with that more. What's your take on it?
I absolutely agree with you. I think that you are never too old or too young to be mentored. And, for me personally now, I seek out mentors in so many places.
Yeah.
The world that I work in is changing so quickly, right? The digital
Yes.
space and platforms and I mean, all. And, I am not a spring chicken, but I want to believe that I still think like a spring chicken. And and the only way to do that is it's not about remaining current, but it's about remaining curious and knowing where maybe your blind spots are and seeking out those individuals that are doing it really well or opening to having a conversation and kind of talking it through. And that I think to me is incredibly important, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do today if I didn't have, this like collective of humans that I have met and maybe those that I haven't even met yet who are
Yes.
going to help me, understand and work through some of the challenges that, that we face in just getting tasks done. And I hope that I'm that for them as well, whether
Yeah.
it's being a hype man, or, you know, helping solve a problem that this non-spring chicken may have some insight into.
Well, and I also think, isn't it such a pleasure when we're able to dig into our experiences and we're able to say, wait, I actually encountered this. And I find that there's such a delicate way of presenting that because I've certainly been in positions of mentorship or even directly managing people, and knowing that I've been faced with the same problem. But when you say to someone, oh, I've done exactly that. That happened to me. And here's what happened. Here's how I did it. Like, that's not going to land. It's about finding a way to communicate. And sometimes you have to let people fuck it up. You've got to let them take it a little bit too far. And then you're like, okay, it's not surgery. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to break everything. And so if it's going to get just like a little bit messy and we can kind of dig through the rubble and figure out what went wrong eventually, cool. But also different people have different ways of getting there. And like I use the example of like, if you take an Uber to get there and I'm on a, well, I wouldn't get there on a skateboard because I don't know how to do that. But if I was on a scooter, let's say, a really chic scooter, and we took different routes to get there, but we arrived at dinner on time, looking good. That's what matters. Like get there how you get there. And then if I can learn something from the people who I'm mentoring, which I often do, or somebody I'm coaching, it's not because my way is wrong or their way is better, but it's also like just having that perspective. Like who wants homogeny? It's so fucking boring.
Absolutely. It's so true. And I'm so glad that you said that there's not one way to do something.
Yeah.
And I think that we often fall into that trap, like, well,
Yes.
I don't know how to do that because I've never done that before, or there's a right way and I don't know what it is. But really it's about like, how are you going to solve that problem? Right.
Yeah.
And sure, there are, elements to what you have to do that may have very finite um, ways to do it, and that plugs into how you're making it happen. But ultimately, you're given you're given a goal, an objective, and you have a place to start, and you know that you've got to end up at the end, and it's got to look like what it is that it's supposed to look like, and how you get there is the journey.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you get there without too much bruising, I think it's okay.
I totally agree. And I think it's also like exciting to see all the different ways you can get there. And as a leader, if you're running your own thing, you're also kind of, you don't want to be so impermeable that we're so stuck in our ways. That's how you become, not a spring chicken. That's how you become, a dinosaur in the industry that is not open to change, that's not open to, evolution. And I think that staying current has nothing to do with age and everything to do with, are you inspired by people around you? Are you able to share from your own experiences, but also learn from other people's experiences? It should be so reciprocal. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to improve like their mentorship footprint, their, ability to, be there to help other people grow in their career?
Well, first, be there.
Yeah.
I think that's a big
Show up.
one. Show up. Showing up is huge. Listening, that is probably number one. You know, one of the great sayings that one of my mentors shared with me a long time ago was, she said, behind every complaint is a request.
Mm. Wow. You see that one absorbing. I'm just taking it in.
It's pretty massive, right? And
it is.
I try really hard to listen to complaints or vents, with a sharper ear, because there might be a request in there, and that person that is complaining may not even know what that request is, and the opportunity to kind of dig in a little bit, especially when they're ready, to kind of cut the shit and let's talk about it, because we can't just complain. We have to, complaining is great because it bubbles up problems potentially, or red flags.
Yeah.
But you kind of want to solve them.
Yes. Yes.
It can't just be.
Yeah, you can't just be like, oh, cool, thanks for the complaint. See ya. And it's also like, you can't just complain without having some sort of solution. Like, I like when people can come to me and vent. I mean, I work in the people space. I'm a coach. Like, I inevitably hear all of it. But when someone can come and like, they're pissed off, but they still have like a solution in mind. Like, I'm always just action oriented. It's like, yes, let's vent it out. Like, tell me all the shit that's bothering you, but like, what's your plan to get out of it? And it can't just be, let's fire this person, because that's not the solve. Sometimes it is, but that's not the only step needed to get there. Like, if we do have to fire somebody, I need a 10-step, to get there, not just for compliance reasons, but like, have we explored all the opportunities?
Sometimes you just want to fire somebody.
It's real. You're right. You mentioned though, something that really stood out is like, when someone says like, cut the shit, right? Like, those are big moments in our career. Do you have one that stands out to you? I can think of like several in my experience. I'm like, how many times have people said that to me? Many. But what was like a big cut the shit moment for you that like really switched your thinking? Because when Trey really talked to you about what you wanted to be, what you wanted to do, and made you feel seen, that was someone saying like, we see all these things, but then you started doing things and someone had to check you. What happened?
Well, actually, the biggest moment for me when that happened was me saying that I couldn't do something. And it was through a recruiter at Time Inc. Her name is Janine Maselli. So Janine, if you're out there, I still think about you. I was at Donna Karan and, approaching my 11th year, and I was approached by Time Inc. to talk to them about becoming the associate publisher of marketing at InStyle. And this was like 2004. So InStyle was like the shit.
Yeah.
And it was like, cool, and I'm always that person that says, don't ever turn down a conversation or an interview, because even though, you're not looking, people could surprise you, or you could learn that where you are is the best place you should be. Right. It's sort of like dating.
I love that. Yeah.
And, I sent over my resume, which is all fashion all the time. And she, we had a conversation and and I was like, I don't think this is for me. Like, I don't know anything about publishing.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this. And she sent over a job description, and like, I read it, but like, I wasn't seeing it, because that's not what I did. And I said no. And then she called me and she said, she didn't say cut the shit because she's a lady, but
I'm a lady and I say it all the time. Yeah. But hey, Janine, if you're out there, respect. Yeah.
but something along those lines of like, hey, let's look at this. Let's look at these two job descriptions, like this job description of this position and your resume side by side, and let's see where the translatable skills are. And she literally like broke it down for me. Like, this is a woman who wasn't going to take no for an answer, and she wasn't going to allow me to find the no.
May we all have more Janines in our lives.
We do need more Janines in our life. And I ended up going, to InStyle. Like, it was really hard. And I think part of my resistance was, yes, fear of, not being able to perform and not being able to do the job. The other was, also fear. Like, what if I'm successful here because this is the only place I can be successful? Right. So that's where the imposter syndrome comes in. It's like, wait a minute. If I go somewhere else, then I'm going to have to start all over again. My network is not going to be the same. I'm going to have to prove myself. I'm going to have to tap dance. I'm going to have to explain myself. And I don't even know if I can explain myself, so it was all of those things. But, the pivot to another industry, even though they're all adjacent, is real until you do the Janine Maselli approach, which is really breaking it down, and doing something as simple as, for in fashion, you've got the design team and you've got the sales team and you've got the business teams, you've got the marketing teams. And then in publishing, you have, the editorial team and you've got the production team and so they're just called something different, but they behave very similarly.
Yes. Yeah, but you needed someone to draw the lines for you and just to say, hello, this is literally what you're doing. It's just in a different environment. I mean,
it's true.
Fried chicken can be made in many different ways, right? Yeah, hard slap. And, it's like, it could be Thai fried chicken. It could be Southern fried chicken. It could be this, but it's all chicken. Like, we're frying a chicken. Yes, exactly. Just a little bit of different seasoning.
Exactly. Very good analogy.
Oh, well, I mean, I also love fried chicken, so it was easy to think of. I mean, talk to me a little bit about, in the publishing world, we saw Pitchfork bite the dust just, in the last week and, being absorbed by GQ. So much is changing in the publishing landscape, but you really, made your home there for, a number of years. Obviously, the imposter syndrome wore off, thank goodness. But, coming up in that industry during the time that you were there and really started to see the shift toward digital, what was sort of your way of staying, again, current, staying on top of it, continuing to get promoted? You were obviously not just saying, well, print forever, or I'm out. So how did you kind of stay immersed in that? Or were you forced to really just because everything was changing and everyone else was changing?
Both, like the times are going to force you to change, and you can either do it graciously or you are going to be left behind. And, for me, when I was at Vanity Fair and the digital shift was happening, all these new apps, all social media, our websites, it was necessary for us to hire really smart and plugged in people who could help us understand it. And, obviously if I wasn't interested in understanding or applying, and again, it was like, how do you apply what it is you want to do to a platform or to a social network that is going to help amplify, what it is that you're going to do. It made us just get smarter and better about our ideas, to be honest, because my role in, publishing was literally running an internal agency. We worked with, our sales partners and publisher to, generate ideas that were very brand correct, for the magazine that we were working on, that advertisers could come and lean against and be a part of. And whether that be, a custom unit that we were shooting for in book or a, digital campaign that we were creating for our website or an event, which then had, social amplification around it. it just made us think. And it's not 360, it's more of like an octopus. It's like, this like massive, huge body in the middle. That's the idea. And like, what are all the tentacles that go out that's going to make this moment, whether that moment is, a month, 2 weeks, or even 3 hours, amplify bigger, better. And so it's the willingness to figure it out, to know that you can't do it all. So there are, people out there, young, old, otherwise, that know it better. Bring them in, whether you get to hire them full time or you get to rent their brains for a while and bring them on as consultants. Like, it's super important.
Definitely. I mean, going from, you were at Vanity Fair, you had this, kind of storied, arc, that you continue to climb and grow in your successes there. And then you got pulled back to fashion. How did that happen? I mean, I saw that you made the transition over. And if I'm not mistaken, you were hired into Alexander Wang during a really pivotal time where they had lost a lot of the executive team.
So there was a little bit of a couple of years in there from leaving Vanity Fair and going in-house, which is when I created The Curious Bird. And I had the best time at Vanity Fair. I probably will say that it was like the best job I ever had because it was just so much fun. And at a certain point, and you touched on it, the magazine world or the publishing world was changing so much. And I'd done it for almost 10 years at VF and 2 years before that at InStyle. And I didn't know what I wanted to do next, but I knew how I wanted to feel. I wanted to feel less stressed out. Like, we were stressed out all the time. Like, it just felt like, the money, the grabbing the business and monetizing constantly and finding the next big deal and making sure that the quotas were met in terms of, both print and digital revenue was so intense. It was so intense that, I wasn't having a good time anymore. Like, there was no room for creativity and there's no room for thinking. There wasn't room to sit and have a glass of wine with someone who could actually inspire you to do something great at the brand. So I made the decision to step away, and it was a really hard one, but I made the decision to step away. And I thought, I'm going to take a beat and I'm going to consult. And, which is really fancy of saying freelance. And I created an LLC, so yes, I am a founder. I own a company, but really what it is, it's an LLC. What that is, me, myself, and I get to consult with a bunch of different brands and people who are so amazing and inspiring. So when I left VF, I had a couple of years where I did that. And one of actually my old mentors from Donna Karan went over to Alexander Wang, and she called me and asked if I would be interested in having a conversation with Alex, because there was some shifts in his organization. And she said yes, talked to him, went in as a consultant in marketing and comms, and ended up going in-house, I think after like 5 months or something, 6 months. And was there for 3 years. And it was great, and that was actually really interesting because, I'd left fashion in 2004. And then I went back in 2017. And that spread, I was sure things were going to be so different. What's interesting is yes, of course, things are different because you're no longer running 40 pages of advertising in Vogue in the month of September. Now, you're running amazing digital campaigns and your Instagram is like the Bible, even though it's like so little. Storytelling there has to be great. And the number of assets that needed to, be created every season and, those things were different. But what wasn't different was how you approach a collection or how you approach shows, and what was wonderful was sitting in the first show meeting and the same people that I worked with when I was at Donna Karan, like walk into the room and like the lighting people and the sound people. And it was like, oh my God, it's like old home week.
Get the crew back together. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it was great. And, I really like Alex and we got on really well and got to spend time really, really hearing and understanding what his vision of his company and what he wanted to be, what it was and what he wanted to be. And, and be a part of, this moment where, Alex definitely embraced his Chinese American roots and went for it. And it was great.
Yeah. I think it's really remarkable too to, you said like going out on your own and your consulting fancy way of saying, it's you yourself. And I mean, you also know your coworkers pretty well at that point. You probably get to know what you really wanted to do, what you didn't want to do. And I've been in that position too, where I was consulting and then I went back in house, and it does have a way of kind of, showing you like who you really are and how you work best. And it really made me a better, full-time employee when I was in-house, and then has made me really grateful to be back to consulting now that I'm not. And it's one of those things where you sort of embrace that and you're like, oh yeah, like I get to work in my own way. It actually makes you play well with others even better than I did before. At least that was my experience. And it sounds like for you going in that you had this sort of refreshed perspective, and really came in at such an exciting time for the brand. And, you were in a, C-suite role. So you were able to see so much of what was happening from the marketing perspective. Why did you decide to leave? I mean, I think that would be a dream job for most, and you chose to depart. Talk to me about that decision.
Yeah, so another person in my life who's been in my life for a very long time, Emily Davis, she became the CMO of Airmail, which is Graydon Carter's online publication. And she and I were at a cocktail party. And she asked how I was doing, we were chatting, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe I want to go back to consulting, maybe I'm kind of done. Like, things are getting to a different place at Alex. And, he's got a real group around him now. And like, we've built up the executive team again. Maybe it's time. And then a couple of days later, she called and she said, are you really serious about thinking about going, back to consulting? And I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. It's not like right here, but I'm thinking about it. And she said, well, what if you consulted with? Okay. So that was really intriguing, and then, so she and I had a conversation. I went in to meet with Graydon, and his co-founder, Alessandra, and the rest of the team. And that actually gave me the confidence to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go back and do this, and I was so excited to go back and work with Graydon and the team, because I love working with them, at DF, and there's some familiarity there. I was such a fan of what he was doing. So I sat down with Alex and shared with him that it was, that this is what I wanted to do. So I was resigning. And then we kind of talked it through, and I ended up resigning as a full-time person, but keeping Alex Wang on as a client for another, I think, 9 months after I left. So I had Alexander Wang and I had Airmail, and then I started working with a sustainable fashion company called Another Tomorrow. So it all sort of like came together. Strangely, they were all the companies started with A, but it all came together, and it gave me the opportunity to. It wasn't that I'd stopped learning, but it allowed me to be in a lot of places that being in-house didn't allow me, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. And I think it's also when you have worked across so many different mediums and a variety of environments, you really, know what you can bring to each of those. And it's hard to go back to being kind of single serving when you're in this one environment. It can feel less exciting. And I think that there's, an opportunity when you're consulting to kind of bring some of that magic, or you're inspired by something that was said in a Airmail meeting and you bring it to Another Tomorrow and you say, okay, like, another one of my clients is doing XYZ. And what if we position this way? And I think think it really feeds itself. I often tell people who I'm coaching as well that if they have the opportunity to consult, it will bolster you from a skill set standpoint. You'll just do so much more. Like your 1 year of work versus if you're 1 year in house somewhere, it's going to look very different. But if you have a work ethic, if you have that kind of grind in you, then you're going to be compelled to continue on and you're going to be compelled to do more. I don't think consulting is for people who like want chill vibes. Like that is the biggest misconception that I've experienced is people being like, oh my God, that's so cool. You're like consulting. It must be so chill. And I'm like,
Oh
hi, have we
no,
met? I don't have any chill anyways.
zero chill.
And then you add the consulting on top of that. It's like, I don't have the luxury of PTO. I don't have the luxury of this. So I know that I'm planning out like how I'm going to spend my time. And oh yeah, I still have to like tend to these other 4 clients. So here's a question for you. When do you say no? Because I think that that's something I really had to learn about myself and it took me time. So in the consulting world, when do you politely decline? When do you say no? And also maybe weaving into that advice for other people who have trouble with that boundary because it's a tough one.
Well, it is a tough one. And I wish you'd bring somebody else on to have that conversation because I'm still figuring
I'll
it
work
out.
on it. Yeah.
Um, so I think it's a lot easier to say no at the beginning, right? And actually not to work with a client that you're not feeling comfortable with. That's the first no.
Yeah.
But, for me, because I've never worked in agency before, I've always been in-house, and in-house is always full on. How I consult is that I'm full on. It's as if I have multiple families.
Mm-hmm.
Like multiple full on families. It's big love. And I like it that way. And it supercharges me. It also exhausts me because you can imagine like time is not something that we can make more of. I mean, I don't say no a lot and I probably should say no more. But right now where I am in my career, I'm interested in saying yes more often than I say no because the challenges or the tasks that are put in front of me just put more tools into my toolbox.
Yes.
And that's what I'm interested in. And I think for me, being a consultant and remaining a consultant is more, it's not about the freedom. It's more about the learning. And I want the next, decade of my working life to be different than the last decade of my working life, because my interests have changed. I want to learn more. I want to do more. I want to be a part of conversations that maybe I wasn't a part of before. I want, skills that I didn't have before. I mean, like I'm in the process right now of opening Airmail's first New York store. And I've never opened a store before, but guess what? I'm going to learn, or I'm learning.
Yeah. And you're getting paid to do it. I mean, why not get paid to learn if you can?
Yeah. So like that is, that's a gift. And, for me, it's like, yes, I will lead this charge and I will figure it out. And there are moments where I want to pull my hair out because there are things that I don't know how to do. And it's super frustrating because I am a control freak, but it's such a cliche, but it's just going to make me stronger.
I love that. I mean, also like hell yes to just taking on new things because I think it's so easy for some to get really comfortable. I suppose the name The Curious Bird, now we're learning the curiosity part, right? Is like, you're like, I bet I could do that. And, perhaps it's a little bit of Janine in your ear being like, you've already done this. You just haven't done it in this arena. But I do really think that that's special and just, reminding, our listeners too, if you're feeling like you want to take on something new and you're scared that you haven't done it before, Anjali just told you, just do it. Just do the thing.
I know. Yeah. And I do, and as we're wrapping up, like I do hear, young professionals like say to me, well, I have boundaries. Like I'm going to work 9 to 5. Like I'm not going to do anything after 5 that's work related, or, I'm not going to work on weekends, like my mental health and my downtime is incredibly important to me. I think all of those things are valid, but I hope, like there's so many things that we didn't learn from the pandemic.
Yeah.
We went back and busted up all the good vibes. But what I believe, at least for myself, that we can hold on to is our ability to be more fluid in terms of how we work and how we approach it and how we think about work as a construct versus
Mm.
our private life versus, our personal, like our, love life, whatever. And, it's the hardest thing for me to say I'm off now
Mhm.
because our devices are always with us. But I think that, with trust, with coworkers and with, support from your bosses, with the ability to oftentimes live wherever we want,
Yes.
the fluidity and the elasticity of how we approach everything that we do has changed. And I think that's exciting. And I'm not quite sure if that answers the question of, where are boundaries? I think it's boundless. And we have to figure out again, like what makes us happy.
Yeah.
And perhaps if we draw those boundaries before we figure out what makes us happy, we'll never get those boundaries to expand, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. I mean, I smiled because it resonates so much with me, of just figuring out like I'm happy when I'm working. I'm happy when I'm busy. I like that. And busy can mean different things, but I received a lot of flack from certain people for wanting to get back to work shortly after I had a child. I was ready. I knew I was ready. And I started working and I felt really great because I also want to be able to tell my kid that, when they're older, like, yeah, I love working. I also love you. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Both can be true.
Yeah.
And I think that it's also like trusting ourselves that like we can take on the big things, we can do the big stuff. And if you want to do the big stuff, that's great. And then if you want to take a couple weeks off, that's great too. But figuring out, like you said, what makes us feel happiest is something that I think a lot of folks avoid just for the sake of boundaries. And there was this great
Mhm.
article on therapy speak and how we all like overuse it, but especially generationally, I think it's a thing is everyone wants to talk about their boundary and checking in and wait, I'm just going to stop you there because I have a boundary on this. If we can just check in with ourselves on like our happiness, that might be the boundary. Does it make me happy?
I agree. It's like, does it make me happy? No.
Yeah, great.
Moving on.
It might be time to leave. Exit stage left, like, yeah. if you're
Absolutely.
not if you're not happy.
But in the meantime, it's like, keep showing up. Just show up. Interesting things happen.
I really like that. I know we have just a little bit of time left together, and I had just a couple more questions for you, but they're
Yeah.
fun ones. I wanted to know, what are some of your favorite brands right now? Who do you feel like is doing business right? You've really been in the business space. You have, you talked about some of your favorite restaurants and foods to eat. Who's doing business right now? And like, what's exciting to you that's happening in that world?
My God, that's such a hard question. And it's so funny that I can't even come up with one as you ask me that. I mean, it's such a cliche. Like I think Nike does a really great job. I think they continue to, you know, reinvent themselves in their own way
Yeah.
and stay incredibly relevant. I know that,
Yes.
they get dinged a lot because the bigger you are, the more dinged you get.
Yes.
I think that's hard being, sort of on top. Um, I always think that Warby Parker does a really fantastic job, and I'm probably biased because I have a dear friend that's there, and I watch her work her magic. Um, but their creative is always super fun.
Yeah.
Um, I think that for me, I just really appreciate brands, those that are building worlds outside of their core product.
Yes. Yeah. And
You
it's
know,
so much about that. Yeah. It's so much about like what we see, we're in such a visual stimulation society, right? Like it's Instagram or it's TikTok or it's, a mural or something like wild that we're seeing. I mean, we've all seen it. And so it's like, instead of aspiring to be like that giant thing, how do you just stay true to your company as the times shift? And I think that that's
yeah.
hard to do. So the ones that do it, you're right, they totally stand out. I was actually thinking as you were saying Nike, I was like, oh yeah, and Calvin Klein with like Jeremy Allen White, like that took over the, probably most people's mind in America, and onward, but also that huge billboard in Soho. Like, since when is
Yeah.
out of home so significant? Well, all of a sudden it
It's
is
so
again.
true. And I mean,
Yeah.
the super duper luxury brand that, always makes me smile smile is Hermes. Like, I think Hermes has, always and forever done things in a way that, makes you annoyed that you can't have an orange box whenever you want. But I love that, their core business is incredibly expensive shit, but they will make you smile because they decided to build out a diner or a, kiosk or whatever it is and pop up in the strangest ways. And I think that is, I love that. I love that because I might not be able to participate from a product standpoint, but I can participate from an appreciation standpoint. And I think that's great.
I really like that too. I mean, where can people go to learn more about you, the work that you do? Where could we direct them?
Probably really difficult to do because I am someone who is behind the scenes. So I suppose the companies that I work for are the ones that need to be in the limelight. And I'm the person that kind of like lives behind there, kind of doing whatever. But like I said, we are opening our first airmail shop on Hudson Street in New York City.
I love that. I love like the IRL experience of Anjali.
I'll probably mystery. Be in there shuffling around.
That's amazing. I think that's great. And that is so exciting. I do love the like experiential component of that, of like, it's a tangible, thing that you can be in, you can go into that world. It's so rare that we get to do that with brands. So I really like that. Okay. What is one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today? No pressure.
God, that's so much pressure. You're asking all the hard questions.
That's the last one. I had to really put you through it.
That's true. That's true. I think going back to feelings, it's like you may not, even if you don't know how you want to feel, know how you're feeling right now.
I love that. That's perfect. I'm going to actually carry that one around with me for the rest of the week. It's like really what I needed. Anjali, thank you so much for joining me today. It was so wonderful to have you. This has been Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez, and we will talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.